All right, bad faith. So Sartre gives two really famous examples of bad faith, and I think they're both really helpful for understanding what he's getting at. One is his example of the Parisian garçon de café, and this is in your reading. The garçon de café is the Parisian waiter who inhabits his role as a Parisian waiter just a little too perfectly. And you guys can think of what the 21st century equivalent, American or wherever you are equivalent is of the garçon de café. The idea of the garçon de café is, he's very solicitous. He very much has the attitude that, oh, this is a Parisian coffee shop. And he performs the role of the solicitous waiter. As Sartre puts it, he carries the tray just a little bit too high and sort of swings his way through the aisles. The point is that this role is handed to him by society, right? He is letting a prefabricated role dictate who he is and how he acts. And that allows him to say, oh, well, I'm not choosing to act this way. This is just what we garçons de café people do. I'm trying to think of a good, more contemporary equivalent that might appeal to, actually, a very close equivalent is, right, like the hipster barista. You go into a coffee shop and the hipster barista is like, has tons of piercings and has a sullen way of talking and is reading poetry and, has her fixie bicycle parked out front or whatever it may be, whatever stereotypes you have about the hipster barista, right? And is very slow to make your coffee and has a lot of attitude. And you can tell that she's living a role, right? That this role has been prepackaged for her and the social norms and expectations have been prepackaged for her and she's just carrying them out, right? Or, there are so many roles like this. I'm reluctant to give too many of them because they're going to come off as stereotype, but you can think of them for yourself. So why is this bad faith? It's bad faith because instead of saying, I am choosing this way of talking and this look and this way of behaving, and as it happens, I'm choosing a pretty shallow set of choices that tons of other people have also chosen, but this is my choice. Instead, you act like this is just handed to you by your nature and by society. This is just who you are, and you have no control over it. The other example he gives of bad faith, which is unfortunately a very sexist example, but it still works as an example, it's just unfortunate how he picked the gender of it, is he gives the example of the woman in the movie theater who wants to be sexually passive. She doesn't want to make the first move, but she also really is interested in sexual intimacy with her date. And so she's going to be passive-aggressive about it, right? Instead of coming on to him, because she's worried about besmirching her virtue if she makes it clear that she wants sex. This is the old-fashioned sexist part. So instead of doing anything to indicate that she wants to be intimate with her date, she just carefully lets her body fall in such a position in her chair such that it's easy for the man's arm to fall onto her, right? Or to fall onto her leg. So instead of being the one who says, I am choosing to flirt with you and to come on to you, instead, she puts her body into this passive position where she can say, oh, well, I didn't make any choices here. He's the one who chose to come on to me. I was just sitting here and this happened. And I just didn't stop it because once he did it, then there was a social expectation. And so I just went along with the social expectation. It's a very sexist example. But the point is, we often exemplify bad faith by acting as though, even to ourselves, right, pretending to ourselves and other people, that things are just passively happening to us, whereas in fact we are arranging ourselves so as to lay ourselves open to being governed by social expectations and circumstances and social rules, rather than taking responsibility for our own choices. So how does this relate back to the episode? Well, for example, Bojack's original apology to Kelsey, which he doesn't get to her, is, I think, another example of bad faith, right? It's a very trite apology. He's just performing what's expected. He's letting the rules of how we give apologies and the rules of social niceties dictate what he does. As we saw, but I didn't use the phrase bad faith then, an important thing about the underwater world is that he basically can't, in general, act with bad faith because he doesn't have any idea what the expectations are, and he doesn't understand the norms, he doesn't understand the environment, so he doesn't know how to let it guide him. And because he's forced to overcome his bad faith, because he's forced to make and own choices because nobody else is going to tell him what to do, this is what lets him grow over the course of the episode to the point where he overcomes his bad faith and gives her the very different, not bad faith at all, apology at the end, right? His apology at the end, unlike his first apology, like I said in the last part of this lecture, his apology at the end takes responsibility for his actions, says that they were his. It breaks the social mold and says something that is not just a social nicety or a ritual, but something very real that he came up with out of his own authentic sense of what happened. It's a beautiful apology, and it's an apology that shows no bad faith whatsoever, right? It's not just by the book. It's not just going along with social expectations, and it's not evading responsibility. It's taking responsibility. And this is out of character, right? This is not what Bojack usually does. And it leaves him feeling very vulnerable. And like I said, she doesn't even get the apology, which makes it all the more poignant. He finally does this authentic, good faith act. He finally gets apology right, and the apology isn't received, which is pretty painful to see. Now, Sartre thought that you got past your bad faith specifically by freeing yourself from your connections to other people and your burdens of your intimacies. His wife was Simone de Beauvoir, who was at least as famous of a philosopher. She was an extremely successful philosopher in her own right. I would imagine that this theory of his, that the way you overcome bad faith is by not caring too much about other people and freeing yourself of connections to them, was probably pretty irritating to his wife. That would be worth a lecture in its own right. But this episode, again, it's both Sartrean and not. It gives us a very different message, right? The message of this episode is that you can get past bad faith, not by freeing yourself from your connections to other people, but through your connections to other people, right? By choosing to take responsibility for those connections and take them seriously, and choosing to take your obligations to the people to whom you're connected seriously. He takes his obligations to the baby seahorse surprisingly seriously, even though there is no social rule or expectation telling him that he has to. Right? He forges that connection, and the connection itself is what imposes these very authentic responsibilities on him. That it's not bad faith, right? Like nobody's telling him he has to take care of this baby. He's not saying, "Oh well, I'm stuck with this because I have to be because this is just what people do." That would be the bad faith way of doing it. Instead, he chooses this obligation, but he chooses it out of genuine connection and care. It's the care that allows him to get past bad faith. It's not care that gets in the way of his bad faith. And the same thing is true of Kelsey, right? It's his willingness to be connected to Kelsey, to acknowledge that he does care about her feelings and about the obligations that he has to make her feelings right and about her connection to him. It's his acknowledging that lets him get back past bad faith and give a real, authentic, responsible apology rather than a trite, ritualized one. Again, there's more to be said about apology, but I'm going to save it for my apology lecture. But I want to just end by pointing out that we learned something really interesting about Bojack in this episode. He hates the underwater world, he says. He hates it because it stresses him out and it gives him anxiety. Why does it give him anxiety? It gives him anxiety because he's alone in it and he can't rely on social rituals and expectations. He can't rely on his sense of familiarity and comfort or his sense of place. And so he can't act with bad faith. He's forced to overcome bad faith. And that's exactly what's stressful and scary to him and what he hates. But even if he hates it and finds it stressful, once he is truly alone and truly not bound by place and expectation and truly doesn't have this possibility of bad faith, it turns out, surprise, surprise, that he can do much, much better at acting authentically and doing right by others, sustaining connection to others and making choices that honor his connection to others than he ever could in the world in which he's familiar. Right? So again, we get the Sartrean message that you have to overcome bad faith and be fundamentally responsible for your actions, combined with the anti-Sartrean message that you will find the ability to do that, not by cutting yourself off from others, but by acknowledging the way that forging connection gives you the resources and the reason to act and to act with responsibility. All right, that's episode 4. That was long, but I hope it was interesting. See you in the next lecture.